So, well, first of all, welcome everyone to this webinar on the ACER Market Monitoring Report published last month, and where we have the pleasure of hosting a good number of panelists to hear their views on barriers to distributed energy resources and how we can bring more flexibility through the electricity markets. So, as shown in the agenda, Christian will open this webinar in a few minutes. Then I will give a short presentation on the main outcomes of this report, and then we will have two panel discussions with different panelists and two Q&A sessions after each panel discussion. And at the end, Christoph will close this webinar. So moving now to the housekeeping rules, please keep your mic muted. And from now on, you can start posing questions using Slido. You can use the link on the screen. To increase the visibility of some questions, you can also give them a like, and we will try to address as many as possible during the two Q&A sessions after each panel discussion. Please also note that this meeting is being recorded, and the slides and recording will be uploaded to our website on Monday. And without further ado, I'm delighted to give you the floor back, Christian, to open this webinar.
Thanks a lot, Christina. Let me just check that you hear me okay. Okay, so for now we're good, despite the snow and all. Indeed, as Christina was saying, welcome to this webinar. It's going to be an informative one, a rich one. Also, because of the richness, probably a bit of a time compressed one. So I won't labor too much the opening, but I wanted to say a few things. Christina and the team have put together a quite comprehensive, detailed, informative report, which will have, Christina will go through sort of the headlines, and we'll have ample opportunity over two panels chaired by Johan of our Swedish NRA counterparts to go through. It's comprehensive in width and depth, and at the same time, it sits squarely in the center of, let's say, our emerging energy system. And as such, the report points to some key enablers of that future system, and also very much, let me take over the slides here a bit. Here we go, of some of the barriers holding it back. So it's a key issue for, let's say, market participants, consumers at large, and very much also for public authorities, including governments. And that will be my cue to say that we had the opportunity also to present, let's say, the headlines of this report for the energy ministers right before Christmas. I wonder why it does that. Okay. Right before Christmas, invited by the Spanish Council Presidency. Indeed, earlier this week, we presented not the report per se, but sorry about the slides there. I think my system is doing a bit of a hiccup. But also to finance ministers of the Eurozone countries, not the report per se, but some of the broader challenges going forward and how they impact positively or negatively future EU competitiveness. So at the same time, it's a detailed, comprehensive report. It's also, in my view, a politically very relevant report. And part of that sits alongside the message of this slide, that given where our power system is moving with a lot of intermittent generation, flexibility needs will increase very significantly. And so there is a high premium, let's say, on unlocking flexibility potential, as it were, across the board. And this report points to some of the enablers and barriers in that respect. Now, at the same time as that, we are also witnessing what I would say are sort of increasing indicators that something needs adjusting. And I'm fond of likening this a bit to going to the doctor and get some numbers. That's become hence the picture to the right. So go to the doctor, you get some numbers. Are they good numbers? Are they bad numbers? That depends a bit, depends on the context. And we sometimes liken that to the issue of the increasing occurrences of negative wholesale electricity prices that we see across Europe. Is that good? Is it bad? Well, maybe it depends a bit. Very high or very low prices are often indicators of something, so they tell you something. It could be that existing generation is perhaps not flexible enough, or it is not incentivized enough to be flexible. It could be that the demand side is not responsive enough as it should be, perhaps. It could also be a signal, perhaps, that there is not enough storage in the system to do economically efficient arbitrage, etc. So there are indicators that tell us something, and indeed, this particular report tries to tease out some of the barriers which could be in place across the different member states and Norway, and so arguably needs addressing in some shape or form. Equally, when we discuss this with decision makers, we're keen to point out that there is potential upside in many aspects of addressing these barriers. It's very much worth doing. Some of those upsides concern more cost-efficient market operation. Some other upsides concern what I think is becoming increasingly topical in many countries, namely the very significant rising costs associated with grid infrastructure enhancement, whether at distribution or transmission level in the future. And with those rising costs, which seem inevitable, there will, of course, be a high premium on lowering what that cost might be otherwise via, let's say, more efficient means of addressing grid congestion and similar challenges. And unlocking some of the barriers that Christina will go through in a second will be part of that, let's say, solution space. Now, to close a bit, I wanted to bring to you also a message that we have brought to governments as well. And this is an important message, I think, sometime to emphasize. Now, obviously, there are important efforts undertaken at EU level to address this issue of increasing flexibility, facilitate further demand response, further participation of the thousands and millions of distributed assets that we see coming onto the system. But we're also keen to emphasize that probably the lion's share of efforts will be done at national level, maybe even at local level. So there is no need, let's say, to wait for further EU rules before one starts to tackle some of the existing barriers. And the way we sometimes portray that, we try to sort of tease that out a bit in a visual way. So indeed, one aspect of this broader issue is electricity market design. Many of you will know that a provisional agreement on the electricity market design package was reached right before Christmas. And indeed, that has an important role to play, for instance, in terms of assessing flexibility needs at national level and at the EU aggregate level. There are issues around peak shaving and products for addressing peak shaving needs. So it has a role to play. It's an important outcome. There's another aspect at EU level, which we are also heavily involved in. It's the current revision process for EU grid connection codes. I would liken this to a bit, let's say, the technical foundations of the entire system. We, right before Christmas, sent a draft revision to the European Commission, which we expect to come into place during the course of this year, maybe towards the end of this year, that addresses issues around system security, provisions of essential services from these distributed assets like inertia services, but it also addresses issues around economies of scale by having similar connectivity standards, which can enable, say, secondary markets for electric vehicles going forward. So that's an important contribution as well. A third element, which we're also significantly involved in, many of you will know that a new network code on demand response is in the making. Currently sits with system operators, transmission and distribution system operators. We expect to receive a draft later this spring, after which we'll have 6 months to complete and possibly amend that particular draft before we send that to the European Commission. And this is also an important set of rules which, let's say, give more teeth to some of the more fundamental principles in the clean energy package. And then finally, as the fourth component in this wider puzzle, it is indeed this report that we undertake now for the second time of trying to identify different barriers to the uptake of demand response and to the participation of distributed assets, which Christina will go through in a second. So there are several let's say, efforts at EU level to address this wider issue, but the message remains. We think there is no need to wait for, let's say, these further regulatory efforts. The lion's share of addressing these challenges, in our view, are at the national level, not at the EU level, and so one can get going and address some of those barriers to unlock the potential for the the solutions that our future system will need. That was my opening. Realizing we're a few minutes behind schedule, I will turn it over to you, Christina, to go through the main elements of the report, and then we move to Johan to kick off the first panel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Christian. So let's start with the report. First, let's have a quick glance on the scope and methodology of this report. So basically, the report tries to monitor barriers to distributed energy resources, including demand response, new energy storage solutions and distributed generation, also new innovative business models and other entrants in the electricity sector. It aims to assess whether these resources and actors can offer their flexibility in the different wholesale electricity markets and system operation services. And it focuses on two types of barriers, regulatory barriers, mainly related to the lack of implementation of some provisions of the clean energy package and some EU guidelines, and also some restrictions related to the market design and structure. And it illustrates the status of these barriers in the EU 27 member states and Norway in 2022. If we move now to the methodology of this report in a nutshell, basically, it follows a bottom-up approach. So starting from raw data, we calculate more than 40 indicators. Some actually comprise a long list of questions, and we create a scoring system for each indicator. All indicators are normalized to ensure comparability between member states. And last, the score of each barrier is calculated as the average of the normalized indicators. And when at least half of these indicators are missing, we consider the barrier as not a barrier. If we focus now on the results, we can see that the barriers come in many sizes and shapes. So based on the previous methodology, this is an overview of the 8 barriers monitored across the member states. Some are clearly found as highly restrictive in purple, moderate in orange, or low in yellow. But the important message here is that there are many others that are hiding in plain sight. So even when the barrier is shown as not too restrictive, there are still many cases where there are some restrictive market requirements or some relevant legal provisions that are not properly implemented in some member states. So we don't have time to go deeper in all these barriers, but at least the intention in this presentation is to show you some examples of those that are holding distributed energy resources back. So let's start with the lack of a proper legal framework to allow them access the different markets and system operation services. Here, for example, we find that the progress in setting a general legal framework for new entrants is still uneven across Europe. So there are many member states that have not yet involved responsibilities of active customers, aggregators, and citizen energy communities in line with the Electricity Directive, even though the deadline of transposition was the 1st of January 2022. So just to give you an example, we find that independent aggregator as market participant has not been recognized in almost half of the member states yet. Another important element is the aggregation models. And the lack of these models is an important regulatory barrier for distributed energy resources. It's clear that the new rules on demand response are going to further specify the requirements of the Electricity Directive. So they are going to define the different aggregation models that may be applied by the member states, and they are going to specify roles, responsibilities, and interactions between the different market participants. However, in this report, we try to make a first very general categorization of the different aggregation models in place to try to identify what is missing. And basically what we find is that for those highlighted with a red frame, we see that there is a lack of at least one aggregation model up and running or in a trial stage or as a pilot project in some electricity markets or market-based system operation services in almost half of the member states. Highlighted in purple and blue, we can see that there are still member states that have aggregation models, but not all customer segments are covered by these models. And as you can see in the overview, there are still a lot of NAs. So meaning that in general, member states lack monitoring the aggregation models in place. And this is actually a relevant aspect because if they don't monitor whether or not they are being implemented and basically what is happening, member states cannot ensure that all market participants engaged in aggregation are really allowed to participate in all electricity markets and market-based system operation services on an equal and non-discriminatory terms as required by the Electricity Directive. If we move now to the next barrier, well, it's clear that if we want end users to provide the flexibility, they need to receive some kind of price signals and incentives. So here what we find is that the lack of smart meters still restrict access to price signals in nearly half of the member states. So in particular, there are 10 member states that have a rollout rate of below 20%, with five being 0% or practically 0%. And as shown with the red and orange dots on the map, there are also some member states that are experiencing delays to develop smart meters. The smart meters installed should also have some functionalities to help consumers provide flexibility. And here we find that the most common functionalities of the smart meters installed are the energy consumption in real time and historical consumption. However, as you can see in the table, there is still too much gray. So meaning that there is still limited information on the actual functionalities allowed by the smart meters installed in the member states. So there could be member states with a high penetration of these devices, but still there could be many consumers not having full advantages of these devices. In addition to the smart meters, time of use network tariffs may also encourage consumers to provide implicit demand response, or they could incentivize them to invest in generation, storage assets to become active customers. Here what we find is that there is a big number of member states who implement time of use network tariffs. However, the level of penetration is still limited in some of these member states. And in the eight member states not implementing any kind of time differentiation in their network tariffs, we find that most of them have not properly assessed whether their implementation would be beneficial. So they haven't performed any kind of pilot study or impact assessment to assess if this time of use network tariffs could be implemented. In any case, implementing time of use network tariffs doesn't ensure consumers can receive price signals, because in some national frameworks, suppliers are allowed to offer fixed electricity price contracts to their customers, even when time of use network tariffs are set. So that's why we consider that it's important to know what is the level of penetration of the retail electricity price contracts with some kind of time differentiation. But here we also find that currently most national regulatory authorities don't monitor this information. And as shown on the right, this is just one example. This is the level of penetration of dynamic electricity price contracts for households and non-households. And you can see the level of penetration is still unknown in many member states. Focusing now on what is happening for the provision of balancing services. First, we show what happens with the pre-qualification processes. Here, the new rules on demand response should also include provisions to simplify and streamline the pre-qualification processes. However, in the report, we assess some restrictions in the current processes. So, for example, there are some member states where the TSOs don't allow pre-qualifying reserve providing groups yet, or in some cases, the aggregation of different technologies, so generation, demand, and storage units under the same group is still not allowed. Another important aspect is the maximum duration of the pre-qualification processes when required by TSOs after making some changes in pre-qualified reserve providing groups. So, for example, after switching or after adding or removing some units. And on this regard, we find that there are huge differences in the maximum duration of this pre-qualification between the member states. And in some cases, this maximum duration is not regulated. And this we consider that could become also restrictive, because this may create some legal uncertainty and no legal protection for BSPs in case the duration of this process gets protracted. And it may also have a negative impact on the BSP's business case. We also assess different aspects in the design of the different balancing products to check whether they are in line with the European target model. And here we show some examples of restrictions. So the minimum bit size is still larger than 1 megawatt in some member states, still reaching even 10 megawatts in some cases. The balancing energy bits with a validity period longer than 15 minutes It's also found in some member states within 1 hour in most cases, except for France with 30 minutes. And another aspect that is also important and that could become restrictive is the procurement lead time and the duration of the balancing capacity contracts, which shouldn't be longer than 1 day, because otherwise distributed energy resources can find difficulties to commit long time ahead of delivery and for very long delivery periods. And here to show you one example, in the bar chart, we identify that in 2022, the member states still procure high shares of balancing capacity yearly, monthly, or weekly ahead delivery. Focusing now on the capacity pre-qualified of distributed energy resources, we see that it's still limited compared to conventional technologies. Most capacity pre-qualified consists of distributed generation, especially in Austria and Romania. But because in these cases, there is a lot of capacity pre-qualified of hydropower plants connected to the distribution network. This is followed by demand response units, mainly commercial and industrial loads, especially in the Netherlands, and batteries, mainly in Germany, France, and the Netherlands. The point here is that this refers to the capacity pre-qualified, but here I would also like to highlight that there is also very limited information on the actual participation of these resources in the balancing services. So on the balancing capacity procured, balancing energy activated from these resources, which may be explained by data availability issues in portfolio-based systems, but still we think these metrics are important to assess whether or not these resources can participate in balancing services and whether the removal of the restrictions over time will indeed facilitate their participation. Moving now to restrictions to providing congestion management services. This is also a relevant topic because local markets for congestion management or forward dispatching are expected to be one of the main drivers for unlocking the flexibility potential of demand response and distributed energy resources. And actually, it's in the spirit of the clean energy package to set market-based dispatching with only 4 exceptions, which are basically if no market-based alternative is available, if all available market-based resources have been used, if there is lack of competition, or if there could be some predictability of network congestions. And what we find here is that congestion management measures are usually based on non-market-based procedures, especially at distribution level. In many member states, DSOs actually don't take any measure other than requesting the TSO to solve the congestion or to make some network reinforcement and expansion. And when we identify the reasons for not using market-based redispatching, we also see that in many cases, the national regulatory authorities are not able to ensure whether these reasons are in line with the exemptions allowed by the clean energy package or not. So for this reason, we consider that the member states should define some kind of iterative national reassessment process with a transparent decision-making procedure, basically to understand the reasons for not implementing market-based redispatching and to review whether these reasons become no longer applicable over time. Because we shouldn't forget that we are in a context with increasing network congestions, with more and more distributed energy resources and new actors willing to provide flexibility. So there are some market conditions, such as predictability of network congestions or lack of competition, that may become inapplicable. As you can see in this slide, well, currently most member states without market-based redispatching lack this national process, and that's why we consider this makes it difficult to set up local markets for congestion management. Moving now to the last barriers regarding the restrictions to participating in capacity mechanisms and interruptibility schemes. In this presentation, we focus on capacity mechanisms, on those that were in operation in 2022. And we find that some member states have relaxed some requirements in the last years, but there are still some product design features that may discourage distributed energy resources. Overall, the capacity contracted from these resources remains limited compared to conventional generation technologies. And as we see on the left, we find that it has been steadily increasing over time in France, Ireland, Italy, and Poland. But on the right, we see other countries where there is no participation or the participation of distributed energy resources is still low. And as mentioned before, in some of these cases is because of some restrictions, especially in the design of some products. Last but not least, there are some aspects in the retail markets that may also hold back distributed energy resources. So, for example, with a limited competitive pressure in the retail market, new entrants may find more difficulties to offer innovative and flexibility products. And on this regard, we find that there is still a high market concentration ratios in some member states. On the right, we show the level of participation of retail price interventions. Interventions, including regulated prices, are not a barrier per se if they are targeted and aim at those most in need. However, when they are not well designed, they could remove price signals to reduce or switch the electricity demand, and they can also prevent distributed energy resources from accessing different electricity markets. So in this regard, what we find is that there are at least 30 member states that have some kind of retail price intervention implemented as a business as usual, so predating the energy crisis. In all cases, they consist of regulated prices, except for the Netherlands. And these price interventions are only targeted to vulnerable consumers in limited cases. And when they are targeted, the main beneficiaries are still consumers who are not being vulnerable. So consequently, a high share of households and non-household consumers in some of these member states have regulated prices, and in some cases, they may not receive proper signals to potentially provide a demand response. So at this point, I think the question is, well, how to overcome all the barriers identified. So in the report, we provide the specific recommendations per member state that can be summarized as shown in this slide. Basically, we recommend member states to speed up the implementation of regulatory changes, especially the transposition of the electricity directive, electricity regulation, and the implementation of different European guidelines and network codes that are relevant for distributed energy resources. We also consider that it's important to set suitable rules for new entrants, so to define the roles, responsibilities, define the different application models, and so on, to also ensure that open access to all electricity markets and market-based system operational services is possible for these resources, and to ensure consumers receive price signals. Member states should also speed up the development of smart meters, ensure that the proper price signals are given in the electricity bills, and also to ensure consumers are aware of the benefits of providing a demand response. Of course, the report identifies different restrictive requirements for the participation of imbalancing markets, capacity mechanisms, interruptibility schemes. We highly recommend removing all these restrictions. Also, member states should ensure that local markets for congestion management have a chance to develop and mature. And for this reason, as mentioned before, they should define a transparent national process to assess when and where these local markets may be implemented. And of course, when member states consider that retail price interventions should be implemented, they should be targeted, aimed at those most in need, tailored, and temporary. So this is all from my side regarding the market monitoring report on barriers to distributed energy resources. So now I give the floor to Johan Roop to moderate our first panel discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christine, for the introduction of the report. So we will start with the first panel, and it will be in the following order. So we first have Mike Via from Smart Energy Europe, and then we will have Naomi Cheviat from Solar Panel Europe, then Lene Peters from ThinkE, and then Julia Majewska from European Commission DG Competition. Now, all panelists will address the following two questions. Are there ways that public authorities can move quicker and, for example, facilitate business and technology innovation with regards to distributed energy resources? And then if you had to pick one or two main reasons for why we only see a limited participation of distributed energy resources in wholesale electricity markets and system operations, what would they be? So first, I give the floor to Michael.
Thanks a lot. I hope you can hear me well. And I would like indeed to congratulate very much with ACER for this forward analysis. And we as Martin, which are indeed the European of market players that are offering solutions to activate consumer flexibility, we are very satisfied that a business organization and the respected EU body are aligned with the identification of barriers and recommendation for improvement. So thanks a lot, Christina and Christian, for also your presentation. This is something that we have done throughout the years through our own research based on the information that our members or market players experienced. And we have collected that through position paper reports, contributions to EU-funded projects. So it's very reassuring that an institution like ACER and the business organization as Martin are aligned with identification of problems and identification of solution. And this is the precious, really, effort that should be indeed used, in particular used by ACER itself, indeed in the forthcoming assessment of the demand response network code, but also for the development of other network codes that are affecting the market-based development of demand response, including the grid connection network code. And I want to make indeed a specific reference to this grid connection network code because we have seen in December some alarming proposal by ACER, in particular with regard to heat pumps that are not fully aligned with the report that we have just presented. Another very important remark that I want to make, and congratulations, is that you are not discovering new barriers to what we have also in the past identified. So they are all very well known and already addressed by European legislation. So indeed, I fully agree with what Christian said at the beginning, that we don't need to wait for further European legislation. And also, I agree on the fact that there is a myriad of multiple barriers that hinder flexibility to be activated. So indeed, replying to the first question, yes, we might identify that there is an important barrier, like, for example, the lack of an aggregation framework, that is an important barrier to target, but is actually, there is a myriad, a multitude of barriers, and particularly problematic is the additionality of barriers. So there are several low, small barriers that add up and completely prevent participation and activation of flexibility. I would add also an important point that is actually the assessment. So we somehow disagree with some of your national assessment on the impact of some barriers, and this is particularly evident for Italy and Spain, where from your analysis, it appears that they do not have too restrictive frameworks. Although I would say that I would reassured by what Christina said, that even if in some assessment you don't identify too restrictive barriers, there are some hiding barriers that indeed actually prevent. And it's particularly the case for Italy. And I just want to make, for example, provide you an example. Last week, I was contacted by the CEO of an important aggregator of demand response operating in Italy, selling volumes to the UVAM tenders by Terna. The contracted volumes are just 12% compared to the requested volumes by the TSO, which is ridiculous. as it means that the system is not at all balanced via the UVAM project. And to reply to the second question, this is not due to low market interest. Aggregators are there, but the 12% very low contracted volume is due to barriers on the rule of the game, which can be easily solved by, indeed, the entities. So we need rules that facilitate and enable, instead of having rules that command and control. And they will allow demand-side flexibility business models to flourish. So our sector is highly impacted by regulation. Hence the relevance of your report. We cannot rely on regulatory uncertainty, but we need clear enabling rules. Otherwise, our business sector is going to collapse. And the clean energy transition cannot happen without flexible demand. I will stop for the moment, but happy to continue in the exchange.
Thank you, Michael. And before I give the floor to Naomi, I saw a hand was up, but I would like to stress, use the Slido, please, at any time to put questions. So I give the floor to Naomi Sheva, Solar Power Europe.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invitation, but also for the report. I concur with what Michael has said on the quality of the report. It's so useful to have real data on the implementation of a number of elements that are in EU law and that we need to monitor in the next year. So it's a huge work and it's extremely useful. So huge thanks from Solar Power Europe to ACER and to the teams for the massive work that has been done. I work indeed for the solar PV industry, and I think it's very important to recognize that distributed energy and distributed solar PV are inherent part of demand response together with electrification. What I mean by that is that demand response for us, it's not only reducing the demand from following a system signal, but it's also a consumer that adjusts the heating time of his heat pump to meet the daily production of his solar PV panel, or an office, for example, that adjusts the charging time of its EV fleet to meet with the local production of rooftop PV. So it means that smart electrification and solar PV and development of distributed energies have a massive role to play in the next years. And I think we need to also pass on this message and this narrative, the role of DERs and smart electrification in the energy system integration as we work on 2040 objectives. But it also shows that we need to think in terms of we need to think demand response also in terms of building energy hubs with local energy sources and local electric consumption, including when we do grid planning. But so we are here with regulators, and your question was, and this whole report and discussion is about what is needed to improve, to be improved in the regulation to facilitate the growth of our business solution. I want to cover a couple of points. The first point is really to assess the flexibility needs. We've seen good proposals in the electricity market design, the idea for DSOs to conduct flexibility needs assessment. We expect a lot from the implementations of those provisions. The provisions on grid development plans and others related to distribution system operator in the past EMD legislation have not been sufficiently implemented. You've shown that when you show the use of market-based mechanism for congestion management. So it's important really to take the last step and help DSOs implement that provision. There's also a lot of good practices, and we need to favor the circulation of those best practices. But also make sure that obviously the remuneration of system operators allows them to tap into the flexibility potential. The second point that is needed is to really create a better price signal for our distributed energy sources and also smart electrification. Again, I come back to what you showed on the congestion management. We really think that congestion management can be solved through better market mechanism, but it's not sufficiently the case. And we're working on the local flexibility markets, but there are other solutions. For example, self-consumption and collective self-consumption or energy sharing, which we see used to keep electricity local in some markets. So it's important to work on implementation. But also we do see a potential in flexible grid connection agreements. So grid connection agreement where the consumer agrees to limited export capacity, a static export capacity and pre-agreed so that it doesn't take over flexibility markets. Next to that, of course, there will be a need to improve access to flexibility markets. We fully agree with the barriers that have been identified by the report. But one barrier that we also identified is the lack of harmonization of data, harmonization of interface and data interoperability, and we do believe that it's important to have a minimum level of interoperability of interface, and that could be solved in the demand response network code. So voilà, there are a number of elements that we need to solve. This report is really a good first step, but again, I think we need to also make sure that this is correctly monitored as we worked on reaching our 2030 objective and 2040 objectives. I'll stop there, but happy to continue in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, and we are surpassed the time schedule, and yeah, we have 3 minutes each to have the question and answer. So I give the floor to Lene Peters. Thank you.
Hi. I'll try to stick within the 3 minutes because the two previous speakers have already addressed a lot. I have one thing to add with regards to your first question, what can public authorities do, and complementing also what Naomi said. What we see in reality is that it is very difficult to effectively activate that distributed flexibility. And to some extent, what Naomi said was there are the expectations. There's the energy sharing aspect. We did a research a couple of years ago trying to understand how different member states implement it. And what we saw was giving reductions on prices that were not based on any impact study. And that actually conflicts a bit what policy is versus what regulation is. And it creates a basis that is not aligned with the principles of regulation. So you should provide predictability, transparency, consistency, independence. And that was something that we saw in the implementation of the clean energy package, the part related to energy sharing and energy communities, that sometimes it was more used as a policy approach rather than a regulatory approach. And that is risky and brings me to one minor point. What we should also not create, and that was done exactly with the topic of energy communities and energy sharing, was that there were expectations created that this would be, financially attractive for end consumers. And if we talk about flexibility in especially a distribution grid, then the value of the flexibility you can offer is in monetary aspects, it's very small. So we should also be clear about the fact that, in many countries, replacing a cable is still more reliable and more price efficient. We will come to an end on that. But if we would increase the prices of flexibility, it would probably target the ones who can pay for flexible assets, have still room in their energy consumption, and hence it would be against any logical principle of solidarity with regards to price setting. On your second question, which was the reasons for limited participation of distributed energy resources, there is indeed the lack of the effective business case, but what we also see is that there is a lack of understanding of end consumers about what it is and how they should actually contribute to that. And to close, there is a very nice example of a Norwegian region that when they implement something like that, when they come up with policy, they have 14-year-old teenagers assessing whether the information is clear. And that is actually what we should be aware of. The average intellectual level of the population, even if we're targeting adults, for comprehending these kind of things is the one of a 14-year-old. So use that to make sure that you get everyone on board, because otherwise it's again a kind of a Matthew effect we're creating here. I hope I stick to the 3 minutes.
I think you did. Thank you so much, Lynn. And I cannot emphasize more than your last intervention there about, as many journalists say, can you explain it as to a child? So sorry, taking time. And now the floor is given to Julia, DG Competition.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much, Johan, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to this very interesting discussion. Well, as agreed before with organizers, I will divert slightly from your questions, Johan, because I would like to have this use this opportunity to shed some light on the work done by the European Commission in respect to demand response. So, well, there are, as presented in the introduction, there are several ongoing initiatives at the EU level. And in the next panel, my colleague from DG Energy will present some update on the revision of the regulatory framework. And myself, I would like to present you the study that was launched by DG Competition last year. So it's a study on barriers for demand response participation in electricity markets and state aid measures. Well, this sounds familiar. This our work and study is, of course, very much linked to the ACER report presented today, and to the work done by DG Ener on network code. As for the ACER report, it delivers very important findings on the barriers for flexibility services, and we treat it as an important source of information for our study. However, we will look at those barriers also from a slightly different perspective, from the state aid control angle. I would like to underline that we strongly agree with the findings of ACER report, and especially with the statement that we should avoid addressing symptoms before the cause. And that's why any public intervention in flexibility market, in electricity markets in general, should be very carefully considered and designed. And well, our ultimate goal is that all distributed energy resources should participate in the electricity markets in a fair and competitive way. And that's why we have launched our study. And the objective, our objective is threefold. First of all, we want to better understand the links between the interplay between the barriers and the necessity for the state aid intervention. Secondly, in cases where public intervention is deemed necessary and well justified, we hope that the study will deliver evidence that will support DG Competition, European Commission assessment of measures notified by member states to the European Commission. And thirdly, we hope also that this study will be helpful for member states to better shape their state aid measures in a way that would limit any undue distortions of the electricity market. In that respect, we also hope that our study will shed some lights on the best practices from different stakeholders and member states. As for the progress, well, we are expecting the final report to be ready by July this year. And we are also organizing our own webinar, which should take place on 5th of March. And well, we'll follow up soon with the invitations. So I would like to use this opportunity to also invite any stakeholders interested in demand response aspects to the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia. So there you have it, folks. 5th of March is the next opportunity. So I will invite back Christina to join the panel list. And as we are a bit short of time, I think I will try to pick some questions here from the Slido. And the first one, I don't know if we can go backwards this time, so to say. So maybe I start with Lean.
Yeah.
There is a new reality of huge development of distributed energy resources connected to the DSO grid. Do you agree that barriers for the development and use of distributed energy resources and generally demand response results in large part from an approach which is based on the old structure of the energy sector? So I guess the gist is that, are we building the future on an old, outdated system?
I'm not fully convinced that that is the truth. I mean, there's also a reality. When we implemented the first Belgian neighborhood battery years ago, 2018, there was also this idea that, you know, the provision of the services of that battery in a completely undersized cable would be beneficial for the DSO. But if I take the point of view of regulation, then I have to implement the measures that are as cheap as possible, because that's one of the things I have to do then. And to be honest, changing the cable would be the equivalent of 15 euro per year per connection. There's no way you can make a business case with a battery. So even if we say the battery is amazing and can provide services, there's also the realism of the fact that, and that's what I said with regards to the realism of understanding a price signal. And whether you say that's an old system or not, that's reality. I mean, there is a value, and the value is only what it is. And we just have to be super careful that we don't do the same thing that we did with energy communities, where often there is no business case, because there's simply no business case. That we are not creating expectations that can afterwards not be fulfilled.
Okay, thank you so much. Building on that one, Naomi, wouldn't there be a business case for energy communities if they actually could utilize all this demand response that we see?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there is already a business case, actually. I mean, so energy communities is really a form of legal organization where you have a group of citizens that control an energy business activity. Whereas what we are working on is more collective self-consumption or energy sharing, which is more a full set of regulation to organize the sharing of electricity, either locally in a branch of the network or in the grid. So it's a system of roles and responsibility. The DSO has to share a number of data, some actors take some responsibilities, etc. And so for energy community per se, I think it really depends, because you have energy communities doing projects, responding to auctions. But when it comes to collective self-consumption, yes, there is a business case, and there will be more, because DSOs are more and more putting a value on keeping energy local. I mean, it's just you have in Spain, for example, you have E.ON or other local energy companies that are trying local electricity consumption with DSOs that are in demand of finding ways of keeping electricity local, and also developing schemes that are simple enough, that are understandable for a 14-year-old, that, as Lynn said, and so this grows the business for collective self-consumption. But of course, it really starts from realizing what's the the issue, what will be the congestion issue, and what's the value that you put to it before it's too late also.
Yeah, I might come back very briefly on that. The problem in countries like Spain is that there's a policy push probably, because when you say I can share for free within a scale of 2 kilometers, when we assessed it, there was no impact study done on it. Now the point is everyone else will pay it because you still have to maintain the grid. And that is the point that I actually make. Yes, there is a business case, but on the expense of a lot of others. And that is actually against the principles of regulation.
I agree with. Just a last word, I fully agree, but that's why I really think that the network tariff for the shared electricity locally, as they do in France, you have a dedicated network tariff for the electricity you share locally that is calculated by the DSO based on the value it sees for the collective self-consumption, is really interesting. And then we meet policy and regulation.
Okay, thank you so much. I know, Mikael, I wanted to address to you, Mikael, actually, is the barriers really in the energy legislation or is it other? I give you an example. In Sweden, the battery has exploded. Then all of a sudden the tax authority came alive and said, if you don't use it only for self-consumption, you should be taxed. And then the business case is rather gone and actually aiding the system, you could say.
But exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, legislation is the problem. And indeed, if you are putting double network taxes or double network charges on storage, then you're killing the business case of the use of a battery or a bidirectional charging of electric vehicles or whatever a storage energy storage facility can provide. We need to think that, these, in particular, continue your example, we don't use decentralized energy resources only for self-optimization. We needed to allow that they are interacting and responding to signals received from the system and providing indeed energy back to the system when there is a need, when there is a stress. So if we are setting conditions that are not allowing that interaction, then you are killing the business models. And this is related to replying to also the question before, to the fact that we needed to change the mindset. We are still using the rules of the previous energy system and we needed to adapt. And the distribution system operators, transmission system operators will need to consider that is not anymore from generation to a simple transmission and distribution to consumption, but it's a bidirectional flow which will increase the system flexibility needs, and we need to see consumers as the providers of the solution instead of the problem, and individually, aggregated, collectively through communities, for example.
Okay, thank you so much, Micah. I'm a bad moderator. I've been ordered that we should have ended this session by 10:57. It's already 10:59. So I'm sorry, Julia, I will not put the question to you. I hope that's okay. So we will move on to the next panel. So I will invite Marta Anszewska from Climate Action Network Europe, Martin Roach, European Association for Storage of Energy, Peter Klaas, International Federation of Industrial Energy Consumers Europe, and Mathilde Lallemand Dupont.
I'll be replacing Marta today with Climate Action Network Europe. So it's Thomas Lewis here. Hi. Thomas
Lewis, you're welcome. So the two questions to this panel to address is, first one is to accommodate rising flexibility need. Do you believe we can mainly rely on markets or mainly on subsidies, state support to get us there? And the second one, what's in your view the most important source of flexibility EU power systems have today? How do we tap into it? What about 2040? So the last one is actually 4. So I give the floor to Thomas then.
Thank you so much. Firstly, yes, thank you so much for this report. And it's vital to be digging into the details, the nitty-gritty of what the barriers are. But I think it's also vital to sort of look at this higher level of what causes barriers in the first place. And this is this massive system change from a centralized fossil-based system to a decentralized renewable-based system. And this large hurdle that we're going to be facing to get over it, it's not just about pointing out what the barriers are, which you've done very well. It's also having the political will to change this and create the momentum to change this. And I believe we talk about markets are always going to play a very, very significant role in the rollout of giving the price signals to move this technology into the system, but also in the operation of how the flexibility happens day to day. But at the same time, we shouldn't ignore the role that subsidies and state support can provide. I mean, the uptake you're going to require to meet the climate emergency, and also to be able to break through this system change to make it into this new world is going to require, we need speed, and we're going to need some level of support and security when it comes to investment. And also at the same time, fossil fuels have had decades of subsidies. These are systematic barriers built on an old system. And so when it comes to when we talk about perhaps support, it's going to have to be very, very careful, very targeted. And I think the electricity market design that's been going on has provided a very interesting way of doing this through the flexibility support schemes. So I think what's important is that countries harness this new power effectively to be supporting clean flexibility, and of course trying to avoid this non-fossil flexibility. So when we talk about then, what is the most important source of flexibility today? I mean, I can talk about interconnection, providing a very, very solid base. I could talk about the existing pumped hydro, which has provided a lot of, filled a lot of gaps, but we're a bit of a limit there due to biodiversity pressures. But really, the conversation is sadly that we're relying on fossil for flexibility. We're relying on gas turbines. We're still relying, or even growing in many countries, of the gas turbines we're using flexibility. And this is obviously leading to these massive price spikes we've had and locks us into fossil fuels. So I think that's the difficulty. So how do we tap into that flexibility? I don't think that's what we want to be tapping into. And additionally, of the renewables we do have, we're also at certain points curtailing this renewables. We're throwing away some of this renewable energy in order to provide flexibility. I mean, in a future system, there'll be moments where that does make the most sense. But at the moment, if you look at the trajectories where curtailment might be going in the future, we're really going to have to be investing in other technologies. So I think when we look further into the future of what source of flexibility we need, I mean, once again, it's going to be a range of sources. It's a common message we hear a lot. But I believe a key one will be demand side response, the aggregating of households and large industry. We have the infrastructure there. It's all about how we can shift those forms of production. We're going to have lots of energy storage, and not just relying on lithium ion, but hopefully a range of technologies. I'm sure Martin could talk a bit more about that later. But
Thomas, I'm sorry, I have to cut you short there to keep the 3 minutes.
If you reduce the used, we don't have to have as much flexibility anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So our next panelist to take the floor is Martin Roach.
Good morning. Many thanks to ACER for the invitation and for producing this very insightful report. Yes, my name is Martin Roach. I'm a senior energy analyst at EASE, which has over 70 members active in the energy storage industry. So for the first question, to accommodate rising flexibility needs, so I'm going to start off by answering the questions, and then after I'll highlight some key barriers about energy storage. And so for the first question, how to accommodate rising flexibility needs? Well, the short answer is that it is better to have it market driven, but acknowledge that markets aren't perfect to begin with. So what we do know from the experience in supporting renewables is that they can support, subsidies can support novel technologies, but they can also provide greater predictability of revenues, which can de-risk investments and improve the bankability. And so this also applies to flexible technologies like energy storage. Of course, markets don't go out the window. The subsidies can be allocated in a competitive way. And we've seen this most recently with the tender in Spain for battery storage, among other examples. To answer the second question about what is the most important source of flexibility, well, today I think Tom already mentioned it's obvious it's fossil fuels. However, up to 2040 and beyond, the role of non-fossil flexibility is necessary to reach our net zero power system. However, it's hard to say exactly which flexibility source is going to be the most important. The future energy system will be dimensioned according to several different flexibility needs, from system stability to ramping to renewable energy droughts and so on. So flexibility sources will contribute to these needs differently. And in this regard, the assessment of flexibility needs, which establishes national objectives for non-fossil flexibility, will be very informative and highlight the contribution of demand response and energy storage. Moving on to the key barriers identified by EE's members. So first, it was already highlighted in the ACER report, the existing EU legislation concerning balancing services should be implemented. So in some member states like Spain, Portugal, and France, some of these balancing services are not procured in market-based manner, or the minimum requirement for eligibility is too high. And then a second barrier is that the dual role of energy storage should be recognized, where it's both a consumer and a generator, and this could be better recognized in the legal framework. It should not be taxed twice or receive double grid charges. These cost-reflective network tariffs should reflect this dual role, and so there might be more clear EU guidance needed, particularly for front-of-the-meter installations. A third barrier is the lack of incentives and market mechanisms for congestion management. I think this was already mentioned in the last panel, but to go a bit further, do network tariffs need to be more dynamic to align with the incentives to provide flexibility? Are network operators sufficiently valorizing non-wire alternatives? Can local flexibility markets and these other types of solutions like non-firm connection agreements be more widespread? Can new grid connections go faster? So removing these key barriers will maximize the value of energy storage and the system benefits it provides. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. So I give the floor to Peter Klaas.
Thank you, Johan. I'll be very brief. Thank you, ACER, for this interesting report. A few comments and tentatives to answer the questions that you ask, which are not easy to answer. First, demand response works best in markets, not in a regulated environment. In a regulated environment, the tendency is always to go towards the easiest solution, which is just building additional dispatchable capacity as a backup, and maybe even forcing some consumers not to consume a certain moment, which I don't call demand response. Whenever demand response is not voluntary, it becomes curtailment, not demand side flexibility. So first, let's make sure that we have a market environment where the responsibility of the balancing of the system is in the first place with the balancing responsible parties, and the pressure there will be the highest to make sure they have their portfolios in balance. Once you go to a regulated environment, it becomes much easier to say we go for an extra reserve margin. Two, not everything is flexible, and sometimes and very often in industry you have to find a balance between the needs of the production processes, not only in volumes. I mean, if you have a steel plant, if you have a chemical plant or a paper plant, the first thing you have to do is make steel and make paper and make chemical products. And sometimes the need of flexibility for the system contradicts with the need of stability of the production process, specifically, for instance, in the chemical industry, where a lot of processes are only efficient if they can run in a stable way. So you have to find a balance between the system needs for flexibility, but also the needs for the industrial processes to be stable. Third, and that'll be my final comment, you have to make a distinction between balancing. We talk a lot about balancing. Don't forget that balancing requires response within 15 minutes in most countries. This is not possible in all industrial environments. It is possible for the happy few and companies that already participate in the balancing market. They can continue to do that in the future, but don't expect every megawatt of flexibility in the system to be able to respond in the balancing market. The large part of flexibility in industry can contribute to adequacy with, let's say, a 24-hour or a few hours time frame, but not in a 15 minutes time frame. Thank you for inviting me, and happy to answer your questions. But I have to leave at 11:30, so I hope we can manage to end it by then.
Thank you so much, Peter. Our next speaker is Mathilde. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank ACER for this report, which is indeed very useful, as it was already said earlier. And I will deviate a little bit from the questions here to explain you what is ongoing on the regulatory side within the Commission, and in particular DG ENER, on these questions. I have a 3 slides, if it's possible to move to the next one. Thanks a lot. So first of all, and I think it's clear in the report that there is a strong need to implement what we already have. So the Electricity Directive and Regulation already sets a really important provision that must be implemented swiftly. The first one, obviously, is to open the electricity markets to demand response and other sources of flexibility, including distributed. That's very important. And the second part is to use this flexibility to enhance the use of this flexibility, and in particular demand response, storage by system operators, and with a particular focus on distribution networks, because this is new and this must develop. And this also comes with two important provisions. First, enable customer to be active. So it was said in ACER introduction, the rollout of smart meters, but also all the regulatory side. So enable really these active customers to be a reality. And the second one is to enable demand response through aggregation. We heard about aggregator framework, for example. This is also a key provision that must be implemented in member states in order to foster this kind of demand response. And I completely join what was said in the introduction, that there is no need to wait for further EU rules. A lot can already be done today. And I think here the indicator that you developed, ACER, in your market monitoring report really illustrate this. On the next slides, I wanted to give you a short update on how we will complement this existing framework with new rules on demand response. So as you all know, a network code is now being drafted to address the remaining regulatory barriers. So that will come on top of what we already have today for further development of demand-side flexibility and other kind of distributed flexibility. So generation and storage will be tackled as well. And now this draft is being done by ENSUI and the EU DSO entity, and will be submitted to ACER in May. And ACER will then take it up, and it will be submitted to the Commission at the end of this year. So that's a bit where we stand. And in terms of content, the current draft, so today, the text covers 4 main pillars. The first one is the market access. So more detail around aggregation model, baseline, settlement. We see that these are key provisions in current regulation, but this will address further points. Second one is how to engage in the market, and in particular with the pre-qualification. It's also a point that was raised by Christina in her presentation of the report. Third pillar is the market design for congestion management and voltage control. I heard quite some words in the former presentations around local flexibility market. This would be addressed here. And last point, TSO, DSO coordination and data exchange. So we hope these rules will help to further address the remaining barriers. But as it was said, indeed, we should not wait to act, because this process will still take some time. So it's important to continue to have concrete action in the meanwhile. And finally, looking forward, so as you know, the reform of the electricity market design came to a provisional agreement in December. And one of its building block is to boost non-fossil flexibility in order to accelerate renewables. As it was said before, today flexibility is dominated by fossil fuel flexibility, and we need to address this. So first, there would be assessment of flexibility needs at member states level, but this would be based on a methodology EU-wide, and ACER will be mandated to do analysis at EU level and provide recommendation of cross-border relevance, including on removing barriers. So it's important because this will continue to be monitored and will come together with the assessment of the flexibility needs. Second point is that derived from these flexibility needs assessments, member states will define indicative objective for non-fossil flexibility, but with a specific contribution on demand response and energy storage. So there will be specific focus on these. And third pillar, as it was also mentioned by colleagues and in particular from DG Comp, an article on the non-fossil flexibility support scheme that enable member states to have this support scheme under stated rules. So this is not changed. It's also very important to mention that we don't expect that first non-fossil flexibility should come on a market basis, but if this is not enough, then these support schemes are possible and are framed in this reform. And last point, some provision to enhance the use of flexibility services by system operators through network tariffs and through the possibility to use data from dedicated metering device. So on these three different fronts, so implementation of the current framework, new network code in the pipe, and the implementation of the reform, we hope to address some of the barriers that was explained in the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. So now we go over to the question and answer session. And as Peter Klaas is time constrained, I will start with you. Actually, first, maybe a reaction to the last. I think you stated in your intervention you didn't want regulation to make this work. And now we heard even more legislation on its way. You're still muted, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think this is also one of the dilemmas of what is happening in the energy system at the moment. We see a wish to liberalize markets, to make competition one of the major drivers of the elements leading to competitive prices and leading to security of supply. And at the same time, we do see additional layers of legislation, regulation, obligations being introduced into the system. And I do think this is worth an in-depth discussion to say, well, can we have the climate neutral energy system or economy in general that we need by having a well-functioning market? I am a believer, but I do think that it's worth a discussion on how we see that market function in such an environment. Let's not forget that the subsidy in say is a market distortion, that obligations are market distortions, that technology in neutrality are market distortions in the end. So I think this is worth a discussion and seeing how we can make sure that we maintain in a market environment and still go to a climate neutrality in the future and as soon as possible.
Thank you, Peter. I will now turn to Mathilde. What enforcement options do you see for the European Commission to make lagging member states implement provisions in the regulation/directive?
So what we are doing, and we still plan to continue doing and to accelerate, is further exchange with member states and the regulatory authorities to better understand what's happening, how the directive is translated, and then because there are two things: the legal transposition and then the reality. And sometimes these two things are not really coherent. So this is what now we are doing. So engaging more with member states before speaking about enforcement, on which I cannot comment. But it's really about improving our knowledge, and accompanying member states to really implement and take it to a reality. And in this, the discussion on the network code, even though it's different than from the implementation of the directive, are also helping, because it helps to shed light on that, to boost the understanding and to bring concrete initiatives into the process. So that's what we plan to do now.
Okay, thank you very much, Mathilde. For Martin, in terms of incentive for storage, do you see needs to change the way cost recuperation can be improved from a support scheme or market perspective?
Yeah, I think it goes back to one of the points I made about you know, the valorizing non-wire alternatives, right? That you can perhaps avoid some of those costs, or the way that costs are reflecting on the network, how that can be transmitted back to energy storage actors. So I think there's a dual role: is how are we managing the network, and how do we incorporate the value of energy storage in that regard? And we see already that, you know, when it comes to DSOs, that they should have the incentives to valorize these non-wire alternatives. And you also see with the energy market design reform that it's even clear that this sort of total expenditure approach should be incorporated.
Thank you very much, Martin. Yeah, for Thomas, should a distinction be made between one, demand response composed of fossil fuel generators behind the meter at demand sites, and two, demand response composed of real demand reduction, shifting, and or batteries at demand sites? It's a very long question.
Yeah, I'm trying to translate the first one then. The idea if you're using demand response, but really you're running fossil behind the generator is the question. Yeah, definitely that should not be considered, you know, demand response in the truest sense. Yes, you are disconnected the grid. Yes, from the grid operator's point of view, you have reduced demand by disconnecting. And I think the electricity market design is quite clear that under these flexibility support schemes, for example, that starting up generation from the fossil generation from behind the connection point wouldn't qualify. So I think that's yeah, a distinction definitely should be made there. And then the second point was?
The second one was demand response composed of real demand reduction / shifting and or batteries at demand sites.
Yeah, so I think there's always this differentiation between demand response and then demand curtailment. So there's an area where you'll reduce demand at a certain point, but then reuse it at another point. There's shifting of energy. But I think also, yeah, you are going to get to periods where maybe in more of a crisis scenario where the grid is deeply congested, telling people to reduce demand fully, but then not recouping it later, just having these periods of trough. And I think these two forms should have a distinction, and I think both are going to be needed to be used.
Thank you very much. And Klaas, as you still, Peter, as you're still present, I want to continue what Martin said. Do you think it's wise to go from CapEx to TOTEX for the DSOs and TSOs?
Well, that depends on what you mean by it. Do you mean the tariffs of the grid? Essentially, I think that the grid tariffs should, in the first place, reflect the cost of the grid, and that is all these initiatives to go to a time of use tariff. I'm not saying that we're against it, but we think that the market signals essentially should be strong enough, and probably are strong enough to show what consumers or grid users do best in given circumstances. And so we are not against time of use tariffs, but make the market function, and the price signal in the market. We talk about a spread of, let's say, -500 to +3,000 euros per megawatt hour. This is a much more important signal potentially for the grid users than a time of use tariff, where the differences are much smaller. But that doesn't mean we're against it. Okay.
Thank you so much. I see the meeting is only 5 minutes left of the schedule for the whole session, so I think we have to unfortunately stop here, but the questions unanswered, we will try to answer as much as possible afterwards. So if Christophe Jonqueur is present, I give the floor to you to wrap it up.
Thank you, Johan. Christophe from ACER. I will be very short because we are running out of time. Maybe a couple of things. First is I found it quite reassuring to see that there is such a commitment today in this webinar to tackle this important topic. This is, as many say, this is an important topic if we want to make this energy transition a success. It's also quite reassuring to see that there is a broad alignment. There seems to be a broad alignment among all of us on the barriers and restriction to the development of flexibility, but also on the tools and potential remedies to tackle these barriers. Three points. First is I would like to thank, of course, a warm thank to all the panelists and Johan and Christian, and also a warm thank to all those who made this report, but also this webinar possible. First, for the report, I would like to thank all the market monitoring team, and in particular, Christina, who was leading this important report. But this is a collective work. Many other departments and teams in ACER were involved in this work, in particular, Christos, Akos, and Simus. Thank you also to those who made this webinar a success, and in particular to the communication and IT teams. Now, two important reminders. The first one is that this report on flexibility is a part of a broader activity in terms of market monitoring. So this is, in this slide, you see the cycle of our report. There is a first report on the key development in the European energy sector, then a report on cross-border capacity, then a report on the market integration and all the barriers to market integration, this report on flexibility, and then a summary that we usually present to the European Parliament. The second reminder is related to this specific report. As you know, I think as you have noticed, there is an ongoing public consultation. The deadline is to contribute to this consultation is the 2nd of February. We really count on your, beyond this webinar, we really count on your input to help us in narrowing maybe the scope of this report and focus on the most relevant barriers and restriction to the participation of flexible resources. But also the purpose of this consultation is also to help us to unlock the barriers to flexibility and find the remedy and recommend remedies to remove all these barriers. So once again, thank you to all, and like that, I will close the webinar.
Thank you so much for participating today. Bye-bye.